She never imagined that motherhood could feel like walking a tightrope over a chasm she couldn't see, and yet that was exactly where she found herself the morning it began. The morning she realized that sometimes love for a child didn't mean understanding them, and sometimes truth hurt more than silence. Her name was Claire, and for nearly 2 decades, she had devoted herself to raising her only son, Ethan, believing that honesty, patience, and unconditional love were the pillars of her relationship with him. She had stayed up late helping him with school projects, sat through endless soccer games even when she was exhausted, and had always listened. But she hadn't anticipated the subtle, heavy burden of secrets that her own child might carry, secrets that he felt compelled to protect her from, not because she couldn't handle the truth, but because he believed it would shatter her, because he thought choosing peace over honesty was a kindness, a shield, a way of controlling the pain that he himself could barely manage. It began with small omissions, the kind that most parents overlook because they are so easily explained away. Claire noticed Ethan's phone buzzing late at night, but he would smile and wave it off, claiming homework or a group project. He skipped dinner once or twice with vague excuses about friends, and she told herself he was growing up, learning independence, forming his own life. But one evening, as she peeked into his room to remind him to sleep, she noticed something on his desk, a small envelope, the kind used for letters, neatly addressed in his handwriting, and for some reason, it made her chest tighten with unease. She didn't open it, not yet, but the presence of it felt like a signal, a warning that perhaps her understanding of her son's world wasn't as complete as she had assumed. The days that followed were quiet, almost unbearably so. Ethan began spending more time in his room, speaking less and smiling less. Claire tried to reach him with the gentle conversations she had learned worked over the years, asking him about school, about his friends, about what made him happy. And each time, he deflected with answers that seemed truthful enough, but carried a strange emptiness, a hollowness that gnawed at her motherly intuition. She began to feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down on the home, a tension that existed in the spaces between sentences, in the pauses during meals, in the silence of the evenings when she and Ethan were supposed to watch television together. And she sensed it, that somewhere, hidden beneath the polite smiles and soft reassurances, lay a truth he had chosen not to share, a truth that he believed protecting her was more important than honesty. Claire had always believed that raising a child meant teaching them right from wrong, preparing them for the real world, showing them that truth, no matter how difficult, was always the best path. Yet now, faced with Ethan's quiet resolve, she began to question her assumptions. Could it be that sometimes, telling the truth wasn't an act of courage, but a cruel imposition, a choice that could wound those we love even when we meant well? She replayed moments in her mind, trying to pinpoint when the change had begun, wondering if she had missed the subtle signs, the fleeting expressions of guilt, the quick, downward glances, the way he sometimes held back his words until she left the room. And the more she reflected, the more she realized that love, as she had understood it, was not always enough to bridge the gap between parent and child when silence felt safer than exposure. Then came the day that brought everything into sharp relief, a day that began like any other, with the smell of coffee brewing and the soft hum of the morning news, yet ended with Claire sitting alone at the kitchen table, the envelope open before her, and Ethan standing across the room, his eyes guarded, almost apologetic. Inside the envelope was a series of letters, carefully written and folded, detailing choices he had made, mistakes he had kept hidden, and struggles she had never known he faced. And as she read, her heart ached not with anger, but with the deep, twisting sorrow of realization that her son had deliberately shielded her from truths he believed she could not bear, that he had carried burdens alone to preserve her peace, and that in doing so, he had chosen a kind of love that both honored and hurt her simultaneously. Claire looked up at him, and for the first time in years, she saw the full weight of his youth, his fears, and his compassion. He had become, in some ways, both the child she had raised and a person entirely his own, capable of empathy and sacrifice beyond what she had expected, yet flawed, human, and imperfect in ways she could not have foreseen. And in that moment, she understood a profound, uncomfortable truth, that motherhood was not just about guiding a child through life, but about learning to accept the ways in which they navigate the world, even when those choices clash with her own expectations, even when peace is chosen over honesty, even when love and pain are intertwined so closely that she cannot separate them. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, she held him a little longer than usual, feeling the tension of years, the quiet heartbreak of secrets, and the fragile hope that perhaps, in time, the truth could exist alongside peace, that honesty could be balanced with compassion, and that love, though tested, could endure even when the lines between protection and deception blurred. And as she whispered a soft goodnight, she resolved that from this moment forward, she would approach her son with curiosity, patience, and openness, striving to create a home where peace did not demand silence, and where truth could be met not with judgment, but with understanding. The following days carried a fragile tension that neither Claire nor Ethan could fully articulate. They moved through their routines with quiet precision, breakfast at the same time, work and school schedules observed meticulously, yet every glance, every half-smile, held unspoken questions. Claire found herself thinking constantly about the letters, the truths her son had hidden, and the care with which he had chosen silence over confrontation. It was both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring. How many children, she wondered, understood the weight of protecting their parents from disappointment, from hurt, from the raw edges of reality? And how often did love manifest as restraint rather than expression, as avoidance rather than confession? These questions haunted her, making her reassess every moment of her relationship with him and forcing her to confront the limitations of her own understanding as a mother. Ethan, for his part, seemed cautious, almost watchful. He had never been overtly confrontational, but the burden he carried, carefully shielding his mother from the world he knew could be cruel, was evident in the way he measured his words, in the careful pauses before answering questions, in the hesitations when he reached for her attention. Claire noticed it in the small things, the way he avoided discussing certain school friends, the way he diverted conversations away from personal struggles, the subtle tension in his body when she approached topics she now knew were delicate. She realized that while she had spent years guiding him, teaching him honesty and responsibility, he had grown into a young man who valued peace and protection so deeply that he was willing to suppress his own voice. And that realization created a mixture of admiration and sorrow in her heart. One evening, the truth she had long suspected but never fully confronted emerged in a subtle, almost accidental way. Claire had been sorting through some of Ethan's school papers when she found a folded sheet that was not part of any assignment. It was a note, written in his careful, precise handwriting, detailing a situation with a friend that had escalated into conflict, something that could have worried her, something he had deliberately kept from her to avoid causing her stress. Reading it, she felt the familiar ache of heartbreak, but also a deep recognition. Her son was not being deceptive out of malice or irresponsibility. He was acting out of love, even if it meant sacrificing honesty, even if it meant carrying guilt and burden alone. That night, she approached him gently, trying to balance curiosity with respect. "Ethan," she began softly, "I found something you didn't tell me."
Can we talk about it?
For a moment, he hesitated, his eyes reflecting the weight of internal conflict, but then he nodded, and they sat together on his bed. He told her everything, in the same careful, measured way he had used when writing his letters, and Claire listened with patience and compassion, holding back the immediate urge to scold, to question, to demand explanations. She understood now that the act of telling, even this delayed version, was as much a gift as the truth itself. It was his way of showing trust, of demonstrating courage, of acknowledging her without shattering the peace he had so carefully maintained. As the conversation unfolded, Claire realized that the relationship between a parent and child was more complex than she had ever imagined. It was not simply a matter of guiding, instructing, or correcting. It was a constant negotiation between autonomy and protection, honesty and empathy, guidance and respect. She began to understand that her role as a mother was not just to receive the truth, but to create a space where truth could exist without fear, without judgment, without the compulsion to protect at the cost of honesty. And with that understanding came a new determination to rebuild the lines of communication, to encourage openness, to honor her son's choices while gently guiding him toward transparency, and to recognize that love sometimes required patience more than immediate answers. In the days that followed, a subtle shift occurred. Ethan seemed lighter, more at ease, as if the act of finally telling, even after delay, had lifted a hidden weight. Claire, too, felt a renewed sense of purpose. She began leaving small notes of encouragement on his desk, acknowledging his efforts, praising his empathy, and expressing her appreciation for the care he had shown her in his own way. They began having longer conversations, not about schoolwork or responsibilities, but about feelings, fears, and dreams, those vulnerable topics that had been avoided for so long. And with each dialogue, the bond between mother and son deepened, tempered not just by affection, but by understanding, trust, and the shared recognition of human complexity. Yet even as they rebuilt their connection, Claire remained aware that this was just the beginning. There would be moments when Ethan would choose silence again, when the instinct to protect might override the desire to share, when fear or guilt would influence his decisions. And she knew that her role was not to punish or control, but to model patience, empathy, and unconditional support, to create a safe emotional environment where truth could coexist with peace, where honesty could be offered without fear, and where love could survive even the tension between protection and revelation. And so, life continued, not without challenges, but with a new depth of understanding, a recognition that family was not just about shared space or daily routines, but about navigating the unspoken intricacies of human emotion, about honoring choices even when they were imperfect, and about building a bond resilient enough to endure the silences, the omissions, and the quiet sacrifices that sometimes define the path of love. Weeks turned into months, and the delicate balance between Claire and Ethan evolved in ways she had not anticipated. She noticed subtle changes in her son, small signs of confidence that had been dormant under the weight of silence. He began sharing minor details about his day, things that previously would have been withheld, like a funny incident at school, a new project he was excited about, or a thought that had made him pause. Each of these moments, though seemingly trivial, felt monumental to Claire. They were evidence of the trust slowly rebuilding, proof that he was learning that his voice mattered, and that telling the truth did not have to shatter peace. Claire, too, was changing. The experience had forced her to confront the rigidity in her own approach to parenting. She realized that her insistence on immediate honesty, on transparency at all times, had sometimes created a pressure that made her son retreat. She began practicing patience, listening more than questioning, validating feelings before offering advice, and appreciating the courage it took for him to navigate complex emotions in a world that often demanded simplicity and compliance. It was a difficult shift for her, but a necessary one. One evening, as the golden sunset filtered through the living room blinds, Ethan approached her with a hesitant look in his eyes. He held a notebook close to his chest and asked softly, "Mom, can I show you something?" Claire's heart tightened. She had learned to read the pauses, the hesitations, the weight of decisions that involved sharing truths he felt might cause worry. She nodded gently, offering a reassuring smile, and he opened the notebook, revealing sketches and writings he had been working on secretly. They weren't just creative expressions, they were reflections of his inner world, a landscape of emotions, fears, and dreams he had carefully safeguarded until he trusted her enough to reveal them. Claire felt tears well up, not from sadness, but from awe. Here was her son, showing her the depths of his mind, trusting her with pieces of himself he had previously hidden. It was a moment of profound connection, a silent acknowledgement that love could be patient, that peace could coexist with truth, and that their relationship was capable of growth even after times of tension and misunderstanding. She realized that parenting was not about control or enforcement, but about creating a space where a child felt safe to reveal their inner world, knowing that it would be met with understanding rather than judgment. Yet, this journey was not without setbacks. There were days when Ethan reverted to old habits, choosing silence over sharing, and moments when Claire's old fears resurfaced, tempting her to push too hard. But each time, they navigated these moments with new strategies, open-ended questions, gentle encouragement, shared moments of activity that fostered dialogue, and consistent reminders that honesty was never a burden, but a bridge. They learned, together, that growth was not linear, that trust had to be rebuilt incrementally, and that mistakes were not failures but opportunities to deepen understanding. As months passed, Claire found herself reflecting more deeply on the nature of human relationships. She realized that the choices her son had made, choosing peace over immediate honesty, were not signs of weakness, but of maturity. He had understood that truth could be delivered with care, that timing mattered, and that love sometimes required protecting those we care about from unnecessary pain. This understanding reshaped her perspective on parenting, on communication, and on the subtle complexities of guiding a young person through life. The quiet evenings spent discussing dreams, fears, and aspirations became their sanctuary. Ethan's laughter returned, soft and genuine, filling spaces that had been occupied by unspoken tension. Claire's heart lightened with each shared story, each moment of vulnerability, each confession delivered with careful courage. And in these moments, she recognized a profound truth, that love was not always about confrontation, nor about immediate transparency. It was about the ongoing, patient effort to understand, to nurture, and to honor the choices of the person you cared about most. And so, the mother and son found a new rhythm, one where silence was no longer a barrier, but a signal, a cue to listen more carefully, to approach more thoughtfully, and to meet each other with empathy. They learned that the world would always challenge them, that pressures from peers, society, and circumstance would persist, but within the safe space they had created together, honesty could flourish, even when delayed, even when imperfect, because it was rooted in love, respect, and mutual understanding. The following months were transformative, but not without challenges. Claire noticed the subtle tension that lingered beneath the surface. Whenever conversations touched on difficult topics, the topics her son had previously chosen to avoid. Yet, each time Ethan chose to open up, even in small ways, it was like a thread stitching a fragile fabric of trust back together. She realized that patience had become her greatest tool, that listening without judgment, offering support without immediate solutions, and validating emotions instead of insisting on clarity had begun to reshape their bond. Claire had learned that the timing of truth mattered as much as the truth itself, and that sometimes protecting someone's emotional state required careful navigation rather than rigid insistence. One evening, during a quiet dinner at home, Ethan paused mid-bite, looking at Claire with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "I didn't tell you about what happened at school last week." Her chest tightened, memories of prior misunderstandings and hidden struggles surfacing, but she nodded, encouraging him silently. He took a deep breath and began recounting the events, speaking with careful honesty. As he spoke, Claire listened, resisting the urge to interject, to correct, to guide. Instead, she simply absorbed his words, validating his feelings and acknowledging the courage it took to share. By the end of the story, she realized that the experience had strengthened him, that choosing peace over immediate confrontation had not weakened his character, but had built resilience and discernment. Claire also reflected on her own journey. She understood that her instincts to demand truth had been rooted in fear, fear of losing control, fear of being blindsided, fear of failing as a parent. Yet, she had discovered that love required trust, that allowing space for thoughtful decisions could cultivate responsibility, and that emotional growth sometimes demanded patience and empathy more than rules and rigid expectations. This realization reshaped her approach not only to parenting but also to life. She began seeing the subtle ways in which people protect each other, the quiet sacrifices made to maintain peace, and the strength required to hold difficult truths within oneself until the right moment. As weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened in ways Claire had never imagined. They began engaging in shared projects, gardening, cooking, creative writing, that allowed conversations to flow naturally, rather than through forced questioning. These activities became bridges, creating moments where Ethan felt safe enough to reveal more of himself, and Claire learned to celebrate not just the outcomes, but the process of growing trust and understanding. She found herself marveling at the resilience of her son, at the careful thoughtfulness he applied in navigating life, and at the unspoken lessons he had taught her about patience, compassion, and respect. And yet, challenges continued to surface. External pressures, friends, school, societal expectations tested the trust they had rebuilt. There were times when Ethan withheld information, fearing judgment or disappointment, and moments when Claire's own fears tempted her to overreact. But each time, they returned to the principle they had developed together: listening first, understanding second, and responding with empathy rather than judgment. The gradual accumulation of these small victories strengthened their bond, demonstrating that love, patience, and thoughtful guidance could overcome years of fear, silence, and misunderstanding. Claire began documenting these moments quietly in her journal, reflecting on the lessons of trust, resilience, and emotional intelligence. She wrote about how her son had learned to navigate life's complexities by weighing honesty against the impact on others, and how she had learned that allowing space for thoughtful decisions could be an act of profound love. The journal became a testament to their journey, a record of small triumphs, moments of courage, and the transformative power of empathy and understanding. The following spring brought a subtle shift in their household, a gentle awakening that neither Claire nor Ethan had anticipated. Nature mirrored the quiet growth between them. Flowers bloomed in careful patterns, the sun lingered longer in the sky, and even the air seemed lighter, infused with possibility. Claire found herself watching her son in these small, ordinary moments: how he helped a neighbor carry groceries without being asked, how he quietly comforted a friend in distress, how he paused before speaking, choosing his words carefully, and she began to understand the depth of his character. He was learning that honesty, tempered with consideration, was a strength rather than a liability, and she realized that his choice to prioritize peace over immediate confession had taught him emotional intelligence beyond his years. One afternoon, they sat together on the porch, the sky a canvas of orange and lavender. Ethan leaned back, a thoughtful expression softening his features. "Mom," he began, hesitating slightly, "I think I understand now why you always wanted me to tell the truth, but sometimes I wasn't ready. I didn't want to hurt anyone, even if it meant holding back." Claire's heart ached with a mixture of relief and admiration. It was rare for a young adult to articulate the complexity of their motives so clearly. She reached out, placing a hand over his, a silent acknowledgement of the growth she had witnessed, the resilience she had helped nurture, and the bond they had rebuilt together through patience, empathy, and unwavering support. As the day wore on, Claire reflected on her own evolution. She recognized that her initial insistence on immediate truth had been driven by fear. Fear of deception, fear of loss, fear of failing as a mother. But she had learned that control could be replaced with guidance and urgency with understanding. Allowing her son to navigate difficult truths in his own time had not diminished her authority or love. It had strengthened both, creating a space where he felt safe to grow, make mistakes, and ultimately return to honesty when he was ready. The months that followed were punctuated by small victories. Ethan began volunteering at a local community center, mentoring younger students, and sharing life lessons he had learned from his own experiences. Claire observed quietly, sometimes intervening only when necessary, but mostly allowing him the freedom to make decisions and experience the consequences of his choices. She realized that this was the true test of trust, not controlling behavior or constant questioning, but allowing her child to take ownership of their actions while remaining a steady source of support and love. Family gatherings became less stressful, less fraught with unspoken tension. The awkward silences that once lingered after unshared truths were replaced with conversations that flowed naturally, punctuated by laughter, curiosity, and mutual respect. Claire noticed that Ethan no longer feared judgment in the same way. He had learned that transparency, when combined with thoughtfulness, created understanding rather than conflict. And in this transformation, Claire found a renewed sense of purpose, a deep satisfaction in seeing her child become not just honest, but wise, empathetic, and capable of navigating life with integrity. Yet, the journey was not without challenges. Old habits and societal expectations occasionally tested their relationship. Friends would casually inquire about matters that Ethan wasn't ready to share, and school pressures sometimes caused him to retreat inward. Claire learned to navigate these moments with grace, offering reassurance rather than pressure, listening without demanding answers, and supporting her son's emotional boundaries. Each challenge reaffirmed the lessons they had learned together, that patience, empathy, and consistent love could bridge the gap between silence and truth, and that emotional growth was a journey rather than a destination. The summer that followed carried a gentle sense of renewal, as if the entire world around Claire and Ethan acknowledged the growth that had quietly taken root between them. Their home, once filled with tension and cautious words, now resonated with laughter, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that truth did not always have to be immediate to be meaningful. Claire found herself reflecting on the journey, realizing that the moments of withheld truth, the choices her son made to prioritize peace, had not been betrayals, but lessons in patience, empathy, and maturity. She marveled at his capacity for self-reflection, at how he had learned to weigh the impact of his words without sacrificing honesty altogether, and she recognized that this was the essence of emotional intelligence, the ability to act with care while remaining true to oneself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and rose, Ethan approached her with a small notebook in hand. "Mom, I've been writing down things I wanted to share with you. Things I've kept to myself," he said, his voice steady yet tinged with vulnerability. Claire's heart swelled, knowing that the trust between them had deepened to the point where silence no longer represented distance, but reflection. They sat together on the porch, reading passages, sharing stories, and discussing feelings that had long been unspoken. In that moment, the bond between mother and child felt unbreakable, forged not by perfection, but by understanding, patience, and a willingness to respect each other's pace in facing difficult truths. Claire realized that parenting was less about controlling the narrative or demanding absolute transparency, and more about creating a space where honesty could flourish naturally, guided by love rather than fear. She saw that her son's choice to prioritize peace was not a rejection of her, but a thoughtful approach to navigating the complexities of life, and that her role had evolved from enforcer to guide, from questioner to listener. She felt immense pride, not because Ethan had done exactly what she wanted, but because he had grown into a compassionate, reflective, and self-aware individual who could face challenges with integrity. The journey had not been without its struggles, and there were still moments of tension, moments when old habits tempted them back into patterns of miscommunication. Yet, they met these moments with patience and understanding, aware that the strength of their relationship lay not in avoiding conflict entirely, but in handling it with care and respect. Claire saw that true connection came from allowing space for individual growth, and that sometimes stepping back was the most powerful act of love. As the seasons continued to change, their relationship blossomed in ways Claire had never imagined. Conversations became deeper, more meaningful. Shared experiences were richer, filled with trust and vulnerability, and every day, the foundation they had rebuilt together strengthened, proving that love, patience, and empathy could overcome years of miscommunication and withheld truths. She understood now that peace and honesty were not mutually exclusive, but could coexist beautifully when nurtured with intention and care. Looking back on the years of struggle, Claire felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had learned that sometimes the hardest lessons in life and parenting were the ones that demanded patience, the ones that required stepping back to allow others to grow at their own pace. And she had learned that the bonds forged through understanding, even in the face of silence or difficult choices, could become unbreakable, resilient, and transformative. And that her role had evolved from enforcer to guide, from questioner to listener. She felt immense pride, Not because Ethan had done exactly what she wanted, but because he had grown into a compassionate, reflective, and self-aware individual who could face challenges with integrity. The journey had not been without its struggles, and there were still moments of tension, moments when old habits tempted them back into patterns of miscommunication. Yet, they met these moments with patience and understanding, aware that the strength of their relationship lay not in avoiding conflict entirely, but in handling it with care and respect. Claire saw that true connection came from allowing space for individual growth, and that sometimes stepping back was the most powerful act of love. As the seasons continued to change, their relationship blossomed in ways Claire had never imagined. Conversations became deeper, more meaningful. Shared experiences were richer, filled with trust and vulnerability, and every day, the foundation they had rebuilt together strengthened, proving that love, patience, and empathy could overcome years of miscommunication and withheld truths. She understood now that peace and honesty were not mutually exclusive, but could coexist beautifully when nurtured with intention and care. Looking back on the years of struggle, Claire felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had learned that sometimes the hardest lessons in life and parenting were the ones that demanded patience, the ones that required stepping back to allow others to grow at their own pace. And she had learned that the bonds forged through understanding, even in the face of silence or difficult choices, could become unbreakable, resilient, and transformative.